This seems like a long time. Is there something going on?
Well, yourself and just. It's not streaming yet. We have Garrett here. We're trying to figure it out. Sorry.
Oh, okay. Well, that's good.
All right, we are now live.
Good morning. I'm Esther Manheimer, Mayor of the City of Asheville and Chair of the Policy, Finance, and HR Committee. And I'd like to welcome you to the August 29, 2024 remote meeting. All council committee members and staff are participating virtually. To help our audience follow along, I'll state each section of the agenda aloud. We are streaming live on our Virtual Engagement Hub, which is accessible through the Virtual Engagement Hub link on the front page of the city's website. We also have an option for the public to listen live by phone by calling 855-925-2801, meeting code 5257. For those of you joining us today, welcome. For today's meeting, we have the option for people also to call in and comment live during the meeting. To call in and comment live, use the same number I mentioned before, 855-925-2801 and meeting code 5257. Your phone will be muted and you will hear the meeting live. At this point, speakers will need to push *3 to enter the speaker queue. I'll now go through and introduce all committee members and staff who are participating virtually. Council and staff, as I call your name, please say a quick hello. Councilwoman Maggie Ullman.
Good morning.
Councilwoman Kim Roney.
Good morning.
City Manager Deborah Campbell.
Good morning.
Assistant City Manager Rachel Wood.
Probably on YouTube, sorry.
Okay. Assistant City Manager Ben Woody. No, okay, I can't see all the people while I'm reading the script. So Human Resources Interim Director Cheryl Brown.
Good morning.
Okay. And Assistant to the City Manager Jamie Matthews.
Good morning.
All right, thank you. And I'll turn it over to Deborah Campbell, our City Manager, to run the meeting.
Okay, did you want to do approval of the minutes, Mayor?
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes.
Okay.
Can I get a motion to approve the minutes?
So moved.
Do I have a second? Okay, we'll do a roll call vote. Councilwoman Kim Roney.
Aye.
Okay, and Councilmember Maggie Ullman.
Aye.
Okay, and I'm an aye, so the minutes are adopted. And now to the first item after the minutes is the committee work plan discussion, and I'll turn it over to Deborah Campbell.
All righty, thank you, Mayor, and good morning again. As was stated, my name is Deborah Campbell, and I serve as your city manager. This portion of the agenda is to look at the work plan. It's really a look back at the committee's work from last year, in essence, to almost celebrate all the work that has been accomplished by this committee, but also to start planning for how we approach the upcoming fiscal year and work that will be coming to this committee. I also want to apologize to the committee, and I hate to start out a presentation this way, but the attachments for this meeting were not posted in a timely manner. So we had a lot of critical paths last week and this week. That's not an excuse, just an explanation, and prevented us from being more timely in terms of getting the material posted. So I just wanted to go on record for that, and I will take full responsibility for the delay in getting that information posted. We will certainly be more timely going forward. Next slide, please. And so as stated, we are going to provide you with information about the work plan, and our key takeaways for this presentation literally is about more or less alignment, getting clarity in terms of what this committee will be working on, and other committees like the audit committee that is part of like your advisory board that supports this committee will be working on as well. So our annual work plan serves as a tool to plan for and better organize the work of city council committees. The context, and I apologize for this because many of you are on other committees, and you've probably seen a lot of these slides that I will be going over this morning, but it's necessary for context. So the committee work plans are informed by City Council's Vision 2036 framework. Annually, you adopt strategic priorities, and just lately you have been developing goal statements related to those strategic priorities so that we have really a metrics, a measure of how we did in terms of accomplishing things that you felt were priorities for staff, city staff to work on. And then your committee scope of work, which we'll be going over toward the end of the presentation. Committee work plans include a combination of ongoing and administrative items, and again, along with specific assignments for your advisory boards and other committees. And these work plans are dynamic. We always know that sometimes things come up, things have to be adjusted, and we use these work plans really, again, for alignment and for strategic focus and for assignments both to city staff as well as to your advisory boards and committees. Next slide, please. And again, the framework, I know I don't have to go into a whole lot of detail about this, but this vision framework is from work that you all did that created kind of a vision for 2036. We had about 8 focus areas: equitable and diverse community, transportation and accessibility, thriving local economy, connected and engaged community, well-planned and livable community, clean, safe, and healthy environment, quality, affordable housing, and financial resilient city. Then you annually, as I said at your retreat, create strategic priorities that are in the context of that 2036 framework. Reparations, reimagining public safety, homelessness strategies, equitable and affordable housing and stability, neighborhood and climate resilience, improve and maintain infrastructure and core services. These were the same strategic priorities that you developed in 2023, other than you adjusted, improved, and put an emphasis on maintain infrastructure to acknowledge the work that is needed as it relates to our existing and our current assets and facilities. And then you develop priority goals for each one of those strategic priorities. Next slide, please. And so what is the scope of work? What are you charged to do? Essentially, this committee, unlike many of the other committees, deal mostly with a lot of kind of operational and procedural types of things. Operational from the perspective of looking at the budget, the audit, the capital improvement program, debt financial reporting, fees and charges, literally, how do we kind of operate government? Next slide, please. And then your alignment with the framework, the strategic priority alignment, and the strategic priority goals. From the framework perspective, we're thinking financially resilient city, thriving local economy, but essentially this committee could be really aligned with all of those 8 focus areas, but we think these 2 have the most, I guess, alignment. And then your strategic priority alignment, improve and maintain infrastructure and core services. And then I would like to kind of read this strategic goal: hire and retain excellent staff, improve public-facing amenities, strengthen regional partnerships, and create an ambitious funding plan for infrastructure investment, including a 2024 bond. And the reason that I wanted to read that goal is because I think that we have set the foundation, particularly for the 2024 bond. We are pursuing aggressively other resources, state, federal, and partnerships to leverage resources in order for us to improve quality of life in this community. Next slide, please. And by the way, please stop me if you all have any questions or concerns. And so from a topical perspective, these are the types of things that come to this committee. Again, audits, budget, the capital improvement plan, total compensation and benefits, which you'll be hearing about as part of this agenda, city services and fees, and I won't read all of them. Next slide, please. In terms of the advisory board connections to this committee, we think it's pretty strongly the audit committee, but again, it could be other committees as well. Next slide, please. So what have you accomplished? And again, I will not read all of them, but again, from a general perspective, it's about fees and charges, and it is about financial things, and I'll read just a few. Water cost of service study and fees recommendations. You all spent a lot of time around looking at our water system, the capital needs, and how do we finance those needs. The capital improvement program, a process for the 2024 GO bond, looking at land use and incentive grants. Again, the legislative agenda, your fees and charges recommendations, quarterly financial updates. Next slide, please. And so this is about how do we move into 2025 in terms of the items that will be coming to this committee. These are just a list, and these items will likely come to you on multiple occasions. As you saw in the previous slide, we had numbers like the water cost of service that came to you a number of times. So for the committee work plan review, we will come back to you next month and kind of finalize this work plan, and we will do it in a manner where we will have items that will be coming to you on a monthly basis from now until probably January or February. The annual audit, total compensation and benefits, that's going to be coming to you multiple times to have that conversation prior to the budget kickoff. General obligation bonds, we hope that by November, we will have a positive response from our community with regards to these bonds. But prior to that, we want to provide you with monthly updates on our outreach and things that we are hearing from the community. The capital improvement plan, quarterly financial updates, the 2025 legislative agenda. You'll be having a joint meeting with the audit committee, annual budget kickoff, Luigi as needed, and other items as needed. Next slide, please. And so here are kind of the next steps. We're at this meeting today talking about the overview of your work plan. In September, hopefully we will finalize that, have conversations with the audit committee, probably in November. We will then have annual updates and work on things that come up or as a result of some of the items that you all review, whatever additional work is needed on those to get those to full council for action. Next slide, please. And so I won't go over the key takeaways again, but I will stop there to see if there are any questions, concerns. Yeah, the next slide, there should possibly a question slide. Ms. Ronnie.
Big surprise, I have questions.
Okay.
Thank you for bringing us back to that strategic goal around improving and maintaining infrastructure and core services. It was helpful to have that as a grounding tool. I think there's a couple things we need to be prepared for, because seeing these lists and like where we're headed next, I'm hearing some creative ideas in the community for ways that we could mitigate property tax increases for renters, and especially as the bonds are up for consideration on the ballot in November. That could be important. Another thing that's percolating is statewide ideas for, I know we can't protect against source of income discrimination, which is so wild at the state level. Virginia's already added that to fair housing protections, but there are some ways that we might be able to help protect renters and vulnerable populations that are receiving, where the housing is receiving federal funding. So there's might be just a couple things to keep on the radar. Another thing that we did this year and last year at this table that I really hope we'll do again is the legislative agenda. And the updates from Brad's office were so helpful in not only following what's happening in Raleigh, what's happening with preemption, so what cities can and can't do, which helps us better understand what we can do, but being able to communicate with that with the public regularly, I found it really helpful as a council member, but it was also easier to communicate that with the public.
Absolutely. Talia, can you go back 2 slides? Keep
The legislative update.
Yeah, it should, no, go forward.
It was just there. It was on the.
Okay,
Yeah.
it is legislative agenda. Yes, ma'am.
Not just the legislative agenda, but being able to watch what's happening throughout and having those updates. So like we form one and put that together, and that takes staff time and energy and resources, but also like the report backs on what's happening in Raleigh. I guess is what I'm hoping to tie in.
Absolutely, we can do that, and we can have Mr. Branham provide us with that information, because he's kind of our link to the legislature. And Mayor and Maggie, I think in terms of things getting on the agenda, it's a collective effort, but we're totally fine with giving those updates, similar to how we do quarterly updates and for environment and safety on crime. We can do that.
That would be great, especially now that we are using a federal lobbyist for the first time. I know I've been getting the email notifications that we're kind of folded into now that we have that relationship. But I think now is a good timely time for that. I like that quarterly update suggestion. Thanks, Kim. Thanks, Deborah.
And then the last thing.
Can I just ask a question, Maggie? What emails are you talking about with the federal laws?
Let me dig. It's like a policy briefing of like a legislative tracker type of thing. That when we first got introduced, I mean, I'm trying to see.
Maybe Brad can tell me what you're talking about. I mean, I get like 100 million emails about what, so I'm not sure. Go ahead.
Thank you, Maggie, for that excellent segue, because I love to talk about these things. As has been stated, we have engaged at council's approval a group that is handling lobbying efforts on behalf of the city at the federal level now. And as part of the services they provide to us, they issue several generally on a weekly, sometimes bi-weekly basis, email updates about various subjects. It's everything from legislative initiatives going on in Washington to grant opportunities, and some are more specific to various infrastructure like water or transportation. So if anyone is interested in those or anyone particular that you're not already getting, let me know and I can make sure that you are signed up for those or as much or as little as you would want. And if you don't have the list, I can share that with you as well.
I would like those.
Yeah, Brad, can you send one to us so that we can check and see if we're already getting these? I guess the connection for me wasn't made that we had hired a lobbyist and that was why we were getting those specific emails, but I'm not sure that I'm getting them. So
yes, I'll
and
be
it
happy.
sounds like maybe,
So.
yeah.
I will shoot council a list of all of the sort of email blasts that they put together in memos, and just let me know which ones. I don't want to give you over information, but happy to sign
It's
you
a
up.
bit
for any of those
much,
if
some
you
of
like.
it.
Yeah,
Yeah, that's why I want to see before I volunteer to sign up for.
Yeah. And I think it was
so-
like a quick email when it started. Sorry to jump you in. So I think that it was just kind of a quick thing and I happened to catch it that time. And some of them are, it's just nice to have, they can be a lot, but it's a good educational tool. But I think having quarterly conversations that can help guide us to like, okay, so maybe you're tracking or following this information, but like how to apply it, because it is pretty policy jargony. But I think that just starting to have an ongoing dialogue at the leadership level of like, can we put any of these into application? What are these are getting triggered for staff? I know the water department through their contractor has federal funding tracking that the water department's recently identified some potentially new funding sources. But again, some of it's just been like in passing conversation, but I think this space for us to really address it regularly or at least focus on it would be really nice.
Yeah, I mean, it's a good, and then I think, the legislature's doing this weird thing where they're kind of bouncing around and going into session briefly, but then they're going to seat a new biennium in January or February, whenever the swearing in is. I assume it's January. So, then there'll be some activity to report, but it would be, I think it would be helpful for Brad to kind of tell us what's going on. The state, we just have to kind of play it by ear in terms of when they're meeting and doing something. But for the congressional piece, that would be nice to have an understanding around. Thanks.
Great. We can, make the legislative agenda be at all levels, be at our local level, coming up to and also down from the federal. So we can definitely add that to the list.
Yeah, and I think we do a state request. I mean, we put together our agenda, and at times we're talking. At least I'm talking with state legislators about some things that we need to ask for that we didn't know we could ask for, and so kind of working in concert with them. Same thing on a federal level. If there are things that are lobbyist flags that we need to be, putting together in a legislative agenda federally, that would be really helpful, and then sort of strategize about helping support the lobbying efforts for those asks.
That's right.
So when I look at these key topic areas, it's not all of the work, obviously, that happens under our umbrella of advisement, but it is curious to me that I don't see like a lot about the human resources part of it. And I know that, we've had some complaints from current and former staff that have concerns. And so I think somehow we're going to have to look at just like how we're looking at the Raft-Tillis recommendations, how things are moving forward. And we also got recommendations from the Cease the Harm audit on data collection. And even in the most recent conversations, I think we're probably going to need some way to communicate with the public, but also maybe make recommendations to council. It just seems like when I looked at all of our different work plans that we're drafting right now, this is a pretty big one and it's ours to hold. And there's going to be times like the September 10th report where it needs to go to the full council, and I appreciate that. It's just, I don't want to have one meeting about this and then it go to the back burner because we have so many other things on our work plan.
Duly noted. Okay, any,
Sorry, yeah, I'll just chime in on that too of, I'm looking forward to kind of hearing more and discussing on September 10th, but I concur that I think that there might be more conversation over time to iterate or things that we're working through that fold into some of the things you presented here around looking at how we compensate, looking at our bands, looking at merit-based pay. I think that there'll be some weaving together of that. So I definitely think calling that in of not only where we're going, but why we're going there is that seemed interesting.
yes, ma'am.
Yeah, I mean, this is an interesting topic in terms of the role of the council versus the role of the management when it comes to HR. And I think it's very appropriate for us to look at these. I mean, the Reptiles report, for example, and it has some kind of broad recommendations, many of which the management has to implement or work through, some of which would come to us because, of course, we pass the budget. And so if there are changes that need to happen to employee compensation, the way employee compensation is structured, or merit-based structure that has financial implications, we get to determine whether or not council supports that. But I assume Brad will help us at times when we're because it's my understanding, say for example, I don't know if council could say to the manager, for example, you have to implement a merit-based pay program. I'm not sure if under our charter or the way it's structured in North Carolina, if we could do that. So it would be helpful to me to understand kind of what's our lane and what can we do, and then to have recommendations in those buckets about what things management thinks need to be worked on and changed that we could act on. And also if council feels like they're not hearing about some things that we've identified that we think need attention and consideration, obviously we need to state that and make sure management is aware of our concerns as well. So I hope that doesn't muddy it up, but I know this is kind of a challenging topic in terms of everybody's role.
Brad, do you want to respond to that?
Yes, thank you, Manager. Mayor, I think you've correctly identified that there are limitations to this. There are areas where the council manager form of government will come into play, and what this council is authorized and empowered to do, and those issues that are left to the manager. Speaking just very generally at this point, there are issues that I think is part of your budgetary authority that this council has some policy discretion over. And there are certainly those areas that are operationalized versions of your budget, which are then delineated to the mayor. Without going into any specifics at this point, it's important, I think, for this group and council as a whole, just to keep that in mind so that we can focus your decision-making efforts on those areas where you are properly authorized. And I will be more than happy to provide support so that you have that information as you continue to go through this process.
Thank you. Appreciate the feedback. We will definitely utilize it as a basis for the conversation we have with you coming up in the first meeting, I believe is September the 10th, or your next meeting. And hopefully we affirm items that will be coming to your committee. And if there aren't any further questions, Mayor, I'll turn it back over to you for our next agenda item, which ironically is total compensation and benefits. Mayor, you're on mute.
Sorry, I'm toggling back and forth here. Okay, and I'm going to turn it over to Cheryl Brown, our interim human resources director, to talk to us about the initial review and schedule of discussion of employee compensation.
Very good. Good morning. Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Councilmember Ullman and Councilmember Roney and others listening. Great segue into this next topic. And really, we're going to be looking at compensation and benefits planning, a bit of past, present, and future look at what's on the radar and what has been accomplished in the realm of compensation and benefits within HR. Next slide, please. Our key takeaways for this morning, as you know, compensation and benefits are the largest component of the city's budget, and compensation and benefits is certainly the part of that budget that is most important to your city staff. So it is a big deal. And you have invested significant resources in compensation and benefits over the last several fiscal years. And as we all know, the FY25 employee pay adjustments proved to be quite complex, and we tried to address a variety of issues affecting significant segments of our employee population. And as you are aware, work is underway to implement a new retiree medical benefit to expand retiree medical benefits for employees hired after July 1st of 2012. And we will be doing that through a health reimbursement arrangement. And we'll talk a little bit more about that later in the presentation. And as you were mentioning just a few minutes ago, there is more work to be done to consider and design and hopefully implement a performance pay program for the city. Next slide, please. So why are we reviewing compensation this morning? First of all, as I mentioned, it's of interest all the time to staff, and it's of interest to City Council, and you want to ensure that your compensation aligns with market factors and is in a good place to recruit and retain staff here at the City of Asheville. We talked about the complexity of the FY25 pay adjustments and what can we as an organization do to refine potentially the adjustments for FY26 so that they are not quite as complex and easy to understand by staff. You all had back in March of 2021, the Archer study that was presented to you recommended several changes to the city's pay structure. And we will be talking more about those recommendations that were provided by the Archer group. But one of those that's of importance, I think, this morning and for the future is transitioning your pay plans toward a more performance-based culture. So year one, there is a lot of work that goes into implementing a performance pay program. You have to design a performance management system that is as objective as it can possibly be. There is a lot of training that goes into designing a performance evaluation system for your supervisors, a lot of leadership development, and also for your employees so that they understand what they're going to be measured on, what the implications are for their performance, and how that ties to pay. So typically in the first year, you want to implement an appraisal system that is not tied to compensation. You want the opportunity to refine a new performance evaluation system and get it as right as you can before you begin tying that to pay, because it can be, if it's not designed properly and implemented properly and trained upon properly, it is very much a disincentive and impacts morale for employees if they don't feel that they're being fairly treated through a performance evaluation system. And as I mentioned at the beginning of the presentation, we're going to talk about our existing approaches, compensation and benefits, future plans, and best practices. And as you know, and I said this in the presentation last week, I'm very informal, so there will be sections in the presentation for folks to ask questions. And there you go, Councilmember Ullman.
It was brewing, so you just opened the door.
Very good.
When you have year one, does that mean this fiscal year, like this is what we're doing now, or is this a proposal? When would year one begin? Did we pursue this?
We'll talk a little bit more about what's already in process this year, but it's going to be at the very highest level within the organization. So I would see year one for your line staff, your non-exempt, your exempt staff, your division managers, Deborah, and correct me if I'm wrong, but the tool being implemented probably at the beginning of FY26. And then refining that over the next fiscal year and then tying it to pay in 27. I know that seems like a long way out, but
it has to be the fundamental foundational things that are needed to implement a pay for performance program in our city. We need to take our time. I really think that's going to be really, really important for us to have, particularly supervisors trained such that we can address any types of inequities or and clarity for our staff to understand how we're going to be measured, defining all of those metrics. So it's going to take a little time for us to get there.
So a follow-up, if year one is actually, what's August now, 11 months away, we're actually like in year 0 then. So what happens in the 11 months
we'll get to
before we're even ready to start year 1?
Yeah, we'll get to that shortly through the presentation. We're going to talk about how we transition to pay for performance.
Okay.
Yeah, there's a little bit more detail in the upcoming slides. Ms. Rowley?
Yeah, I've been trying to really think about how to frame this because in my digging into merit-based pay and pay for performance, I know that there are opportunities for Asheville to be unique and leaders. And I also know that we have a history of bias and inequities in our organization. So maybe we need a creative solution, but everything that I read about merit-based pay is like red flag, implicit and explicit bias. What can you do to fix it if you have an organization that uses merit-based pay? So instead of just like asking us in this moment, since we're looking at some fundamental changes, structural changes, is this at all recommended in the Seize the Harm Monitor Ralph Tillis report? I don't remember that being the case.
I don't remember that being the case, and that is why we are taking our time. Generally, I'm not sure your resources can, but for the most part, most municipal governments do use pay for performance. You know, you can think about inequity in a lot of different ways. Across the board adjustment for those who are truly burning at both the candle at both ends. They are compensated the same way that others who show up. They just show up. And so what we are trying to do is to incentivize the highest level of performance and then compensate. But in order to get there, again, we have to have the same level playing field such that you start here, and if you do this, you get this adjustment. If you do this, you get that adjustment, which we think actually helps address equity. But again, we're getting ahead of Cheryl's presentation, so Cheryl will let you go ahead.
Okay, and we will review Archer's book of business here momentarily that will give you some more information on the prevalence of performance pay plans in local government. So Talia, next slide, please. And you know, just a quick review of the variety of pay plans that the city of Asheville has. You have the executive pay plan within public safety, which was implemented a couple of years ago. You have your exempt pay plan, the non-exempt pay plan, and then you have the unique pay plan structures in fire and police and IT, and then of course your temp seasonal for your summer employees and those that are brought in for special projects and those types of things. So next slide, please. We talked about in the beginning, past, present, and future. So I stole this slide from Tony McDowell out of his deck back in February. And it just is a quick review for you of what the organization has done related to minimum salary increases and general increases since FY21. You see there, 2021, your minimum salary at 31.2, and there was no general increase granted that year. Everyone was in the throes of COVID, and you all were very proactive to recognize, even if just with one-time payments, for those folks that were still on site and your frontline employees during the pandemic. And then in 21-22, minimum salary stayed the same. You were able to grant a 2.5% general increase to all employees. And then your Archer study was presented, recommended changes to your pay plans, and there were additional adjustments that were provided to the fire pay plan in November of 2021. And then 2022, FY23, minimum salary increased to $35,360. A very stout 5% general increase was granted to staff at that point in time. This was the point in time as well where there was significant transition in the police department, and the city was proactive to implement more recruitment and retention incentives for APD at that time. Then additional compression adjustments. You've always been very focused on compression within the organization, so additional adjustments were granted in November of 2022. Also in November of 2022, you bumped that minimum salary a bit higher to $36,816. And then for FY24, your minimum salary increased to $37,960. And again, a very generous 5% across the board increase for your team, and your 6% increase for sworn APD, again, trying to rebuild that staff and deal with the vacancies that were running up around 60 for your police officer group. And that also included other enhancements too at that time for FY24. And then as we know, FY25, this past July, minimum salary raised to $40,360, and it was a variety of implementations for pay, depending on where you were in the organization. For those employees that were earning approximately $58,000 or less, it was more advantageous to provide those folks with a $2,400 flat dollar increase to their base pay. The other employees in your exempt and non-exempt and executive pay plans over $58,000 were granted the 4.11% base pay increase. And then you provided a flat dollar increase of $4,053 for beginning on shift firefighters and maintained the 2.5% separation between pay steps. And then you granted a 6% base pay increase for employees on the police pay plan. So as we mentioned at the very beginning, it was quite a complex year for pay increases in July and the beginning of FY25. Next slide, please. So let's look back on the pay recommendations from the Archer study and see what we've accomplished since March of 2021. They recommended pay structure review and movement. And consistently since the Archer study, the city has adjusted pay ranges every year. And that's very important. If you look down to the third bullet on that slide, you'll see that the city had adjusted pay ranges only once in the 5 years prior to that study, and that was by 1% in 2016. And what happens if pay ranges are not adjusted, if the minimum and the maximums are not adjusted based on market conditions, the organization will continue to fall behind the market, and you'll continue to fall behind in the ability to recruit staff to the city, and you'll fall behind from the retention perspective in that employees are able to go to other organizations who have been keeping pace with market conditions by moving their ranges over the years. So moving pay ranges every year, even if not at the same level of a general increase. For example, you give a 5% general increase. If you only move your ranges 3%, that's still important because you want to do your best to stay competitive in the market. Another recommendation from Archer was to level out the range spread from minimum to maximum. It had varied over the years for different levels within the organization, anywhere between 56 to 60%. 50% is quite standard in other local government entities, and that's what the range spread was adjusted to as a result of the study. So that did bring some consistency to your pay plan structures and helped an ease of understanding by staff. So why, staff would say, well, why do they get to have a 60% range spread and my max is 56% above the minimum? So again, ease of understanding for staff and consistency. Next slide, please. Archer study also recommended.
Sorry, I was too slow to hit my unmute.
I'm sorry.
On that last slide, I think this is an interesting example of city council versus staff. So, we don't vote on pay ranges. We don't vote that's completely administrative. We wouldn't even hear a report about that unless it were in the context of this meeting, but it is something that we hear feedback from employees about. So it's a good to hear that this is being addressed, but just kind of a little bit of a frustration, I think, for the role of a council versus staff in terms of making these changes for employees. So just kind of noting that. I mean, I was thinking to myself, when we do a percentage pay increase as a council, for example, for teachers, their whole step system moves up, right? When the legislature increases teacher pay, they just move the whole step system up. But that's not how it works when we increase pay. And I can see why that would be. This is covering all kinds of jobs that pay all sorts of different salaries. But just anyway, just flagging that. Thanks.
Well, Mayor, I'm glad I'm sorry. I'm glad you raised that, because that is the challenge of pay plans in local government. They are complex because we have so many different types of jobs and titles, and so it's an art and a science. And it varies depending upon the local government, the budget of that local government. But what this is intended to do in terms of that study is just to demonstrate that we are working on and making progress on the recommendations, the more detailed, finely grained administrative types of things that were recommended in that study for us to address equity and to be competitive in the market.
And what we're seeing now in this presentation, I assume, is something of a preview of what you're going to do in your manager's report at council. Okay, thank you.
Well, we'll focus mostly on the HR assessment for the September 10th meeting, unless you all tell me otherwise.
You're correcting me. We're back into the Archer study. I'm sorry. Yeah, you're not doing the Archer study. You're doing the reptiles one. Okay.
Yeah, and what we will do, though, Mayor, this is kind of a preview of, this is kind of total compensation and benefits 101, and then over the next several months, we will have a new HR director, and she will help us go through how we're going to approach this moving forward, at least for this year and coming years. Maggie, to address what are we going to do in year 0 to whenever we implement, if we go to a pay for performance plan. But I would highly recommend that we make some progress to that pay plan. Sure.
Councilmember Ullman, did you have a question?
I'm willing to listen. I still guess I'm confused on what is the work that we need to do in the 11 months between now and then? Because really what year 1 looks like is, instead of 12 months, it's, 23 months. I'm just not sure why we need to wait a year to get started. I don't understand what happens between now and then.
The distance between now and the getting started point is just the time needed to develop the evaluation tool, develop the metrics, train the supervisors, offer executive coaching to leaders and supervisors, internal coaching to managers, train the managers, train the employees, and then make sure that the tool, the design of the tool is a solid design. Again, building that foundation, and we've talked a lot about this in HR since I've been here as the interim. There's a lot of those foundational things that need to be put in place. And then, as we mentioned early on in the presentation, year one, you want, it's really kind of a practice year, frankly, maybe the best way to put it, because you want the supervisors and the managers and the department directors that are reviewing the ratings that might be assessed for employees to be able to look at that, look through a different lens, as Councilmember Roney mentioned, the equity lens, the reasonableness lens, and have practice doing that. So maybe you shorten that period of time, beginning July to 6 months. But you want some practice time before you jump right into an evaluation system where you're tying it to pay. Because I mean, personally, and as we know, I won't be here, but I think you really, you need that practice time so that you don't set the organization up for failure and it be so distasteful to city staff that they don't take it seriously. And there's not the impression by your staff that, yes, I am being rewarded because I am burning it at both ends, and Cheryl is, barely making it to work twice a week, and she's getting the very similar or the same increase that I am. So
it would start.
I hear that.
So it start in 11 months is the idea, and is that what I'm understanding? And the preparation would happen between now and Maggie. I don't work in a workplace that has 1,250 employees, but I do work in one that has almost 100. And I will say, if we're doing a change that's significant, we use a lead time for that long. We have to really educate employees about a change that's coming and have them understand and be able to adjust to it, or it can be very upsetting for some folks. So I think if I'm understanding the timeline, that would make sense to me. But and we can weigh in. But ultimately,
I guess what I want to get to is, like, back on slide 3, you're really telling me you have a 3-year implementation window. And so I must be really honest about that, because what I'm hearing is you need a year to design. You need a year. What you're saying is you need a year to design, a year to train and familiarize, and then a year where you start instituting the tie to pay. And I would then ask the question, is a 3-year implementation period standard, or could that be accelerated? And so I'd love just these slides for posterity be updated, because what you're saying is not a 2-year implementation. You're saying you need 3 years for it.
So I think what we're saying, Maggie, is these are ideas. We will have, as I stated earlier, a new HR director coming in September 16th. She was actually chosen because she has a lot of experience in performance management. We may be able to accelerate that timeline. We're not tied to this structure. And as you said, yes, we can adjust it. What we are saying, though, is this is such a dramatic change from the pay plan and the basis for pay increases now that we want to be very cautious and ensure that when this dramatic change in pay is rolled out, that our staff, our employees will be very familiar. I'll just give you a classic example. Right now, half of our staff don't even, and they've been here for years, don't understand the public safety pay plan. And so we're learning from that and trying to improve and ensure that there's a lot more clarity and what the expectations are, because it significantly impacts employee morale. And so
I hear
sorry.
that.
Mhm.
I'm sorry to interrupt you.
No problem.
I hear that very clearly. And I hope that what you're hearing is like, I'm eager, not wait 3 years before our employees are starting to feel something different. And so I just want us to be really dialing in our expectations of, is a 24-month ramp up industry standard? Is there a way that we can accelerate that while making sure no one feels like it's sprung upon them? That's where the inquiry is coming.
Tim?
Yeah, I guess I hope this ties in. I was waiting for like a question slide, but since we're having this conversation midstream, I know that there was a presentation just a moment ago about the fire pay plan and the 2.5% between steps. And since our budget was passed, there's been some confusion about what that would actually mean. So I wondered if there might be an opportunity to explain how that works when someone is promoted, how the steps are maintained, just for our benefit, but also hopefully to add to understanding in general.
So you want to take that one? I don't know.
Chris Wolf, you're on, aren't you?
Yes, ma'am.
I know you carried the load on the changes to the fire pay plan, so I don't want to misspeak, but we were able to grant the 4,053 lump sum adjustment to the beginning firefighter pay. It was important to maintain the 2.5% spread between the pay steps. And then from a promotional perspective, there were by a small margin, the promotions where they might have been 4.9 prior to the implementation of the new pay plan became 4.6. There were a couple of instances where there was a little bit more of a decrease in the promotional rates. And we knew that going in. There was a lot of discussion with the fire department and a lot of discussion with the manager's office about those impacts with the way that we were going to need to implement the changes to the pay plan. And we spoke with Chief Case, who we asked, how much of an impact do you feel like this might cause because of the change in the promotions or the promotion increases? And he said, I anticipate 10 to 12 promotions during the year. We actually spoke with him about whether or not he would be in a position to not even have any promotions during the fiscal year, so it would not be an issue. But he did say that we would expect 10 to 12, and what we agreed to at the time, and still do, and Deborah, speak up, but we will address, there was concern about compression as a result of those decreases in the promotional rates. So we assured the fire department that we would address any issues that arose and make those right. So I guess that's my response. Chris, do you have anything to add to that?
Your summary is exactly right. We, in trying to add a flat amount instead of being able to adjust each grade by a specific percentage increase, it was important. We recognized as we looked at the analysis to increase and maintain the integrity between each step so that each employee is able to receive the same increase as part of the implementation. And so And we had to address the other issue with the promotion percentage increases and the impact of that. Yes.
Thank you for digging a little bit and adding to our understanding, and once again, to the public record on this matter.
Thank you. Happy to speak about that.
Okay, Chair.
Talia, let's catch up on slides. We've done that one. Okay, I think that's where we were. Okay, so we talked about the compensation policy. Archer recommended that policy be updated, and it has in fact been updated. And we've been working closely with Brad's office to have them take a look at that for us. And we should have that completed and posted back on our One Asheville site and in use here very shortly. So we appreciate legal support. It is a long policy. It is very comprehensive, but I think it's going to be very well received in the organization. And there is a lot of work that has gone into revising that policy. Another recommendation from the Archer study involved new hire offers above range minimum. Department directors did have some flexibility in bringing employees in higher than the range minimum. That was expanded to allow department directors to bring folks in at least 10% or up to 10% above the range minimum if the applicant's knowledge, skills, and ability supported that higher starting salary. And the same philosophy has been applied to promotions. Now, department directors we talk a lot about compression, so department directors are going to be responsible for managing any disruption that might be created as a result of bringing someone in at a higher pay rate than someone that's already in a role. And to make sure that the justification is there for such a distinction between employees within the department. So that is going to require some re-education of department directors, managers, and supervisors, and their accountability for making those decisions. Next slide, please. Another recommendation, compensation practices for employees with different annual hour schedules. I believe you all know that there are 2 full-time schedules that are worked by city employees in Asheville. Folks can either work a 37.5-hour work week, which equates to 1,950 hours per year, or they can work a 40-hour work week, which equates to 2,080 hours per year. What had been happening is the employees working the 1950 schedule on an annual basis had been paid the same as the employees working the 2080 schedule, even though the 2080 folks were working 130 more hours per year. What that means is you would have 2 administrative assistants in a department. One might be working 37.5 hours a week and the other working 40 hours a week. But in the end, they were getting paid the very same. And that, as you can imagine, was problematic from a fairness and an internal equity perspective. So Archer recommended that the city change that schedule or change the practice and pay. What it resulted in is the pay for the 1950 folks is actually less now than the 2080 folks to make that more equitable. Also, Archer, the recommendation, and we have implemented a compression reduction strategy to reduce compression issues in the compensation plans. And we do that as we talked, Councilmember Roney, a few minutes ago. We do handle those on a case-by-case basis. Some of them are much broader than others, but it is a focus of the compensation division, and they are very in tune to those types of issues. Next slide, please. Archer also recommended creation of additional job series, and it's typically positions within one work unit of a department. We chose finance for the example. You hire in an entry-level accountant 1, or you have a full-time equivalent position for an accountant 2, an accountant 3. Each of those jobs have unique requirements to come in to fill those positions. Obviously, your accountant 3 is going to require more, potentially a CPA. than an accountant one type of position. So the city has added additional job series as a result of the study. And the city has also created career ladders. And this is an interesting concept. And we use the example of evidence and property room technician. With a career ladder, you come in as an evidence and property room technician, but there are steps that you can take in your role. You can stay in the position for a specific number of years. You can avail yourself of outside training, so an annual number of hours of training that you would attain, and then also attainment of required certifications. And what this does, it's not a different FTE that the person is moving into, but it allows someone who comes in as a technician to then advance based on time and position, training, and certifications to higher level roles. So you advance to an evidence and property technician senior, and then there's some standards that you must meet, and you move up to the lead role. And this allows, in particular with your more of your labor and trades and your non-exempt positions, it does give them room for career growth and to add to the base salary. And these programs are really popular in the organization, and we get regular requests from departments to look at implementing career ladders within their specific departments. Next slide, please. Okay, this is kind of the pay question slide. So does anyone else have anything in this portion of the program that you might want to have a question addressed? No? Okay. All right, Talia, next slide, please. All right, there were recommendations from the study related to benefits. The employee benefits programs they evaluated, most of the city benefit practices were competitive, but they determined certainly not ahead or more generous than the market in any significant way. And that's what we have found over the last several years in local government where for us old timers like me used to say, gosh, go to work for the government because they've got great benefits. Well, things have evolved since then, and it's more of a standard that we're just not really more generous than others in our market area. We did, effective July 1, 2021, you all added paid parental and family care leave, and that has been very popular over the last several years with your larger organizations across the state and the country. Some of your smaller jurisdictions have not been able to implement such a program yet, but I do think that time is coming, and it's evolved to the extent there is a survey that the League of Municipalities conducts every year to survey local government jurisdictions about the benefits that they offer staff. And this was a question that they added to the survey probably 5 or 6 years back so that they could begin gathering data on those jurisdictions that were beginning to offer this benefit. And then outside of the Archer recommendations, the city added the Juneteenth and the Veterans Day holidays, and they also added a 1% 401k match for employees who would contribute. The city very generously contributes 5% to the 401k accounts for employees. And what was added is if the employee also participated, then the city added a 1% match for a total contribution of 6% for employees who participated in that program. Next slide, please. I want to talk a little bit now about an upcoming benefit enhancement that Deborah presented to you as part of the budget process. We are on schedule in Human Resources to expand the retiree health benefit effective January 1, 2025 to employees hired after July 1st of 2012 when the current benefit was eliminated. Back then, a lot of jurisdictions, because of the expense of retiree health care, did move, to eliminate that benefit for their employees. We have heard over the years effort to enhance this, bring this benefit back, especially with your public safety employees, and add it back to the mix for staff. And it would be a benefit that would be available to all city employees, not just public safety. The benefit's going to look different. It's going to be in the form of a health reimbursement arrangement or an HRA, and will utilize the individual marketplace that we all know about and provide retirees a monthly benefit that they can use to purchase coverage, to pay for claims costs that are not covered by an insurance plan, and spend that money to, again, purchase coverage and cover copays and such out in the marketplace, prescriptions out in the marketplace. The claims experience, the beauty of these types of plans, the claims experience is going to be borne by the insurance company and not the city, which will not impact the city's unfunded liability. And you've probably heard over the years Tony McDowell talk about OPEB, other post-employment benefits, and the change in GASB regulations that required that the city account for those unfunded, for this unfunded liability on their books. And a lot of change has come in that area. So we will be able to provide the additional benefit and not impact the city's position regarding unfunded liability.
And that's because we're self-insured for
Yes, ma'am.
for employee health, right? So
Yes.
so this would be different than carrying health insurance in retirement because we continue to have exposure to those claims. This is saying here's a set amount of funds, you're going to go purchase insurance.
Yes, ma'am. Absolutely. And one thing that was important to us, we are working with our benefits consultant, Willis Towers Watson, and we will be implementing third-party assistance. There is a firm that hires experts in all of the variety of benefit programs available to pre-65 and post-65 retirees. And this company will help employees to navigate the marketplace. There are various levels of plans that they can choose from. There's bronze, there's silver, there's gold, there's platinum. And depending on that retiree's individual circumstances, this group will help them navigate what's going to be the best option for them related to purchasing insurance in the marketplace and any supplemental plans that they might feel that they need. So we're really excited about this connection and connectivity with our workforce. We think it's going to be very, very helpful to those retiring employees. Next slide, please. Okay. Questions on the benefits pieces?
No, I'll just take a
Could
minute.
you share?
I'll just add continued appreciation for paid family medical leave. I know it's a big deal for our staff, and I appreciate it.
Yes, ma'am.
With the health reimbursement arrangement, it's helpful to understand the dynamics of like why it's designed that way and how it functions. How, if it's a reimbursement and I'm a retiree, tell me my experience. I experience something, I make a claim. It's not as though I'm getting a monthly allotment that just accrues over time. It's that I make a claim and through my insurer, I'm connected. This is just like I'm a citizen, like average, this is in my home budget. How is my experience of this and where is the money and what does it mean for us? It doesn't sound like you're saying you retire, every month you get $50 put into a piggy bank from the city. That's not what I'm hearing, but I'm trying to understand. Could you just drill into that a little bit more from like the average employee's experience?
Certainly. What this means is there will be a set amount of money per month that the employee, when they purchase coverage, let's say they spend $250 a month to pay the monthly premium on the plan that they purchase. Then they pay that monthly premium, they submit a claim to the third-party administrator who will be paying those claims for the city, and then they are reimbursed for that $250. And then let's say they have a $30 copay, they go to their specialist or their PCP, $30 copay for going there. So then they pay the copay, then they submit the receipt to the third-party administrator who then reimburses them for that expense. So that's how that would work. So it's not like And that was one of the questions I had from the beginning, because I thought, okay, is the city just going to be putting money into an account somewhere and they can spend it however they wish? And no, ma'am, that's not the intent. It truly is a reimbursement situation. Where
And
they,
then how do we budget that? There would be a monthly cap. We'd have an estimate. It would be kind of a standard amount, and we would just track what employees opt in to have this benefit, and then track it by employees going into retirement. So over time, on let's say a 30-year span, if we start this now, we'd have 5 employees next year or 25 employees. And then over time, over 30 years, let's hope a lot of people get to retire, for crying out loud, then it'll really be an incrementally growing budget need.
yes, it will. But it will be and again, Willis Towers Watson is looking at the roles, the longevity of the staff, the age of the staff. There are going to be some specific requirements about who's going to be eligible to participate, some service requirements with the city. So there is quite a bit of structure that's built around the program. And you're right. I mean, the first year, looking at January 1, 2025, I think it's less than 5 employees that they expect might be in a position to avail themselves of the program. So, and that will grow over time, but Willis Towers Watson will be able to project those numbers. Of course, nothing is going to be exact, but they will be able to work with the city to help the city budget. And it will be budgeted based on the expected number of people to avail themselves of the benefit times the monthly benefit times 12. So whereas the mayor mentioned we're currently self-insured and you never know what's going to hit that self-insurance budget, a catastrophic illness or a lot of claims that are incurred. This will be very much easier to budget for and know the financial impact ahead of time.
Cheryl, can I follow up on that just so I understand how this would work?
Yes,
would the city set an amount every year that would be what I'm trying to understand is the benefit we're providing to the retired employee, is it to pay their premium for the third party insurance, or is it also to cover claims they make through that third party insurer?
Both.
So there is variation in our exposure because we don't know, an employee could submit $10,000 worth of claims, or they could submit a retired employee, or they could submit 500 in a year. You know what I'm saying? I mean, so we will have some unknowns about it.
Well, I think the way to think about it is you would have a maximum. And let's say, for example, we put $500 a month into the city employees HRA. You may have so you have 5 employees, $500 a month. I can't run the math this quickly in my head, but 5 times 12 is 60 times 500, whatever, however much that is. So that would be the maximum exposure that the city would have for those first 5 employees.
So those funds have to be used to cover the cost of the insurance itself as well as the claims being made? Yes, ma'am. Like the copay example. Okay, so the premium and the copays. Okay, that's an interesting. Why wouldn't we just say, look, we're going to set an amount for retired employees to receive every month from the city to go out on the market and purchase insurance, and that's it. And let them buy insurance. They'll deal with whatever coverage they get from that third party insurer. Well, and that's really what's going to occur, because they may get a bronze plan and they may spend $250 a month on the bronze plan, and they may not have any, they may not go to the doctor that month. So that all we're spending is the $250 for the reimbursement for the plan. Then you may have another employee who says, I have some pre-existing conditions. My health needs are more significant. I need a platinum plan. That platinum plan may cost $1,100 a month. So the $500 would go just to spend
to kind of half what the employee would be out of pocket for that platinum plan. And
So then there'd be no money for claims. They would just have whatever coverage that insurance company afforded them.
yes,
Okay, okay. So this is like it's like a blend of an HSA and a yeah.
Yes.
Okay, it's okay. It's that you're just saying here's this set amount of money. You can use it to pay your premium and your claims, but if you buy something that's beyond what it you can use it just to pay your premium.
yes.
Okay, I think I understand it now, and that would be something we'd have to stay on top of every year because, of course, insurance costs pretty much only go up every year. But one other thing that is just an ongoing issue that I wish at some point the city administration could work with the fire department around, which is that our as you know, our fire department is one of many across the nation that in the whenever it was 70s and 80s voted under what the federal legislation that allowed them to do this, voted to opt out of Social Security. And so only our firefighters, no other city employees, are not in the Social Security system, which affects their ability or inability to get Medicare. And so they have tremendous exposure from a health insurance standpoint when they retire. And I think it would be fantastic to see. I know that in order to reinstate this, I guess under the current federal law, the entire department would have to have a vote to put themselves back in Social Security, and they can't pick and choose. It's either everyone's in or everyone's out. But it seems like a pretty critical thing to educate our employees about, because when you look at the costs they're losing in Social Security income and Medicare coverage and retirement, it's a pretty devastating difference to other employees in our system, and frankly, anybody who's an employee of any system.
Yes, ma'am.
I wanted to chime in with one more thought as we continue to see information over the coming months with this program. You mentioned that there'll be some looking forward on what the cost would be, and completely understand it won't be extremely, like, we can't tell the future, but what I'd call future casting, right? It's not the most precise, but it can show you trends. It can show you, if you make this decision, here's a trend to estimate, et cetera. I think that'll be really important in the process, because I think I anticipate this will become a really meaningful benefit, especially as the mayor is saying, to employees who don't get Social Security, or as we see our firefighters retiring younger and younger because of cancer-related risks in their field. I anticipate this becoming not only really meaningful to employees, but also a growing piece of the budget to care for, pay for, support our employees. And so I want to make sure that we aren't making a decision in isolation and without kind of weighing the pros and cons of what would become an escalating cost versus meeting pay requirements or other benefits. So I think that you put something like this in motion, we just want to understand like what the opportunity cost is of spending money in this direction versus another direction, when every piece of the pie around benefits and pay, we all know and hope to grow at some time. So that type of comparing and contrasting this strategy versus others, as well as projecting over time, would be very helpful to make sure we are thinking long-term and comprehensively across the suite.
Yes,
And Maggie, I appreciate those comments, and that is why we had a consultant to help us think through this, give us scenarios. There was a lot of thought that went into this particular recommendation that they gave to us. We shopped it around internally, and this is kind of where we landed. In particular, looking at what other municipalities are doing, which most have just accepted that it's too expensive to add this particular benefit back in. And this was kind of that, yeah, but really, if we want to be competitive, if we really want to treat our employees as fairly as those that, were in the program or hired before 2012, this was not the goal, but it's pretty close in the middle of being affordable for both the municipality and we think for our individual employees that will become retirees in the future.
Another lens we could consider as we deliberate towards this is kind of the difference between those definitions of equity and equality. And I think a lot of the discussion I've had in the community is really about job-related health risks and how expensive it is to maintain medical costs as you age, based on, again, the fire department having just higher exposure to life, their health things. Sorry, I'm like losing my ability to communicate clearly. Looking at this for all employees versus those most at risk of significant increased health costs might be a lens to look at this as well for a financial sustainability lens. I think it's a nice benefit, but is it a benefit that we could afford in perpetuity, or is it one that we would consider for certain employees who have higher employee-based health risks?
And we think based on our research, we can do it for all employees.
Councilmember
Thanks.
O'Neill?
Yeah, I just wanted to like flag something because thankfully we're at the table looking at policy and finance alongside human resources. And so I'm thinking a lot about like how we set funding priorities or make recommendations to the full council on funding priorities. And one thing that's come to attention is that are we applying for the full scope of grants that were available to access? For example, is there federal grant funding for community responder programming? If we have potential funding that we're not drawing down, what is the gap in that funding where we could make sure that we're fully staffed up in grants so that we can amplify our capacity, both in this budget cycle and moving forward? I don't have a big picture on where our grant processes are. Sometimes they'll just come to us in the consent agenda and it's piecemeal here and there. But maybe that's a bigger conversation for our work plan, is what the grant process ecosystem is in City Hall, and how it might help us to prepare for investing in our staff.
Okay, sure.
Next slide, please. Okay, and we're going to go back to a discussion that we've already been having. And this is the pending recommendations from Archer and connecting pay to performance. And Councilmember Ullman, I think I touched on this, that we would be getting to this slide later in the presentation. But this does detail Archer's book of local government business. And it shows that approximately 40% of organizations base all increases on performance. Approximately 30 use only the across the board increases, which has been the city's current method for some years now. And then approximately 30% use a combination. They have a merit pool or a merit budget per department. For example, we did this in Charlotte. Each department was given a 5% merit pool, and they had to recognize employees within that specific amount of money that they were granted. And it might be that all employees would get at least 2% or 3%. Anyone who was at the expected level of performance would get 3%. But your above expected would get 4, your exceptional would get 5. There was flexibility for the departments to recognize employees at different levels of performance, but in the end, they had to stay within that particular merit budget. Now, I will say in Charlotte, those merit budgets were typically 3%, and you could go up to twice the merit budget to recognize an employee. So if you gave someone 6, you had to give somebody 0. And when you have merit budgets that are that small, sometimes the ability to differentiate between the various levels of performance gets very, very hard. And I think Deborah can probably speak to this, and so can Brad, having come from that environment. So that is one thing as you are looking to the future for performance-based pay, to give considerations to those different distinctions that can be made in how you budget for a merit pool. So in summary here, approximately 70% of all Archer clients link some or all of the annual pay increase to performance. So considering prior conversation, is there anything that you would like for me to elaborate on in this slide?
I guess a way to understand the third bullet is essentially there'd be a COLA, cost of living increase for everybody, and then a pool for merit.
Well, sorta. It's the same pool. It comes from the same pool, but you just build the cost of living into that pool. And there are, we call them a merit matrix, and you have your level of performance and what those pay increases are going to be. But you don't do you don't grant a separate COLA and then grant well, I mean, I guess you could, but.
Yeah, I mean, Cheryl, how would that work for a city council? I mean, wouldn't we pass a budget that said something like 3% COLA increase for all city employees and then 3% merit, and then merit is distributed by managers, however that's determined, or whatever system you use for merit pay. But for a city council, that's how I thought that system worked, that kind of hybrid of COLA and merit.
And I believe we had that before the.
Yeah, I do think we did that.
I mean, when I was an employee, this was the system I was employed under.
Yeah, that back in the day, I recall doing that.
You could certainly do it that way. You could certainly do it that way. My experience has been that it's all been rolled into one. The compensation team has built a merit matrix based on the levels of performance where you would be guided as to what level of increase the employee would receive. But if you wanted to separate it out in that manner,
it seems like that's challenging because
I think it's the council action.
Yeah, because how does the council? The council doesn't want to say pass a 6% pay increase and have the net effect be that there are some number of employees that get nothing.
Correct.
And that, because that would be well, that's not what we would intend, and that would be confusing. So I think it would have to be structured so that the council knew exactly what they were doing in terms of the flat rate portion versus what the merit portion was, unless I'm not understanding another way to do this that addresses that issue.
And let me follow up, because I can see how that comment was misleading. When I said someone gets 6, someone gets 0, if someone were to get 0 in a budget process and a pay process for the fiscal year, then that employee's performance would not be at a level that would warrant receipt of any type of pay increase. So, and I can tell you without a doubt that is extremely, in my experience, has been extremely, extremely rare. And the conversation that we would have with departments, if that was the case, is, well, then you need to be considering whether or not that employee and the performance of that employee, if that person is going to be able to be maintained in the workforce. If you're at a position where you're saying you're not going to get any increase for this year, then there are other factors that are prevalent and other things that are going on with that particular person. So that was probably too extreme of an example. So my apologies for not being clearer in that delivery.
Okay, sure. Next slide.
Next slide, please. Okay, so your performance pay programs, this is just to give you a little bit of an update on where we are right now, but HR is currently working with the city manager's office. I think I mentioned this earlier. We want to implement a streamlined version of a performance evaluation process to be tested with leaders and at the executive and management levels during FY 24-25. So we want to kind of practice a little bit. We've enlisted a tool that we're going to use with the CMO's office and directors. And we anticipate, at least with the CMO's office, to get started with this at the beginning of the calendar year. So there are ongoing meetings to put this process in place. And as we've talked, and I won't spend time on this, but it is just so important to establish the strong foundation. We talked about leadership development, internal coaching, the development of the tool itself, the metrics, and employee education. So important for this to be meaningful and successful. And we already talked about the 1 year, no connection to pay. And then we've also talked about differentiating the performance pay awards so that it is significant for employees and they recognize the value of the system. Next slide, please. So we threw in here a potential employee compensation philosophy for you, looking to the future. An effective compensation philosophy for local government employees is the cornerstone of attracting, retaining, and motivating a high-performance workforce dedicated to public service. It should reflect the organization's values and, of course, financial capabilities and the unique challenges of the public sector. Just an example for you. Next slide, please. Core principles of a compensation philosophy. I doubt any of these will surprise you at all. Of course, fairness and equity should be based on equitable based on job responsibilities, performance, and market rates for the various jobs within the organization. Needs to be competitive, needs to focus on internal equity, again, fairness and consistency. It needs to be transparent so that employees know what the program is, how it operates, and the impact that it may have on their compensation. Next slide, please. A performance-based compensation linked to individual performance, of course, but you also have your organizational work plan. There are ways to build performance-based compensation to attainment of organizational work plan objectives. Fiscally responsible, an obvious one, and then looking at total rewards, the compensation piece as well as the benefit piece to support employee well-being and financial security. And next slide, please. Total rewards, we'll touch on this one. It's both the monetary and the non-monetary reward that employees receive in exchange for their work. It's important to consider a competitive proposition for high quality candidates. We are onboarding, we're currently in the onboarding process for your new HR director. Public Works is pending, transportation, so some very high level positions. I can confirm with you that those employees do ask about those non-compensation related benefits available to them. So base salary, various other benefits, including retirement that adds to the value, and then comprehensive approach to valuing employees and attracting and retaining top talent. Next slide, please. Just touching on this quickly, this is another slide I stole from Tony's deck, but you have your minimum salary. This has been updated for the changes we made in July. Your $50,309 is your minimum floor for your entry-level firefighter and police officer. That does not include any other types of incentives, such as education, foreign language, any of the supplements that they are able to receive. So just base salary here. And then the retirement for each of these groups. Fire falls under the 13.6 employer contribution with local government retirement system. City contribution. Law enforcement is slightly higher at 15.4. Then the city's 5% contribution to the 401k. Then fire does get the contribution to the 457. to offset the lower employer payroll tax contribution. We talked about the fact that they do not participate in Social Security, so this is an added benefit for the fire employees. And then your health insurance and various other insurances that is budgeted each year per employee at $10,000. So you see the $50,000 minimum salary does, from a total rewards perspective, go up about 22.6, 22.3 for your fire personnel, and right at about 20,000 for police personnel. And this is consistent with what occurs with other employees. So total rewards are very important. Next slide, please. So next steps. I know this has probably dragged on longer than Deborah thought it might, but so next steps in this work: continue research on best practices, certainly onboard your new HR director, Emily Provence. And I think you're going to be very, very pleased. She is a very solid leader. And then begin discussions internally with staff and various public safety associations, because again, we want to be transparent in how we approach compensation and benefits for the new fiscal year. So it's important to solicit input from all segments of the organization. And then review and discuss with you all beginning in October. And, it's great. It's not even September yet, and you're already getting involved in compensation and benefit studies or benefits information for the next fiscal year. So you're getting a very early start, and you're considering a lot of significant changes for the next several years. So it's great that things are getting going so early. And the next slide, please. And in the essence of time, I will not go back over these. Key takeaways were the same as they were at the beginning of the presentation. And next slide, the last one for questions. I'm happy to address any additional questions that anybody may have. Councilmember Alban?
This might not be a question, but let me just pause and say, this has been a really robust discussion, and I'm doing a tremendous amount of soaking things up, because I think that, still as the relative new person on council, we do a lot of work inherently through the budget process, where we're also weighing a ton of other factors. So just really grateful to really laser focus into something super complex and very, very important to our city and to our employees. So I hope all the inquiries taken as good, because we're tuning in. And as I'm just processing and listening and hearing what my colleagues are saying, something, Kim, that you brought up early on is really sticking with me about how there can introduce, or the impact of personal or implicit bias could have in a merit-based system. And I think that's real. It's real about racial bias, but also personal bias. And I think that part of the peer you're explaining we need to do really thoughtful and meaningful training is so that we can really have our supervisors prepared. So I think we talked about that quite a bit, and I fully believe that. I just was still focusing on how long it's going to take. But what I want to link it back to is something, Kim, that you had shared around what does this mean in a world where employers are really living up to our obligation and responsibility to address where racial or gender or LGBTQ bias still lives. Because the reality is a lot of that bias is just in there we breathe, and then we institutionalize it because of that. So the big precursor is to say, as we explore this and move forward, and as we figure out what training looks like, this is a very, very ideal place to really have deep engagement from the equity office and to really explore what equity DEIJ learnings look like in this context, because I think this is one of the more influential places that we can institutionalize improving our performance towards equity and fairness. So I'd really hope that that becomes a real anchor. And having worked on doing just that with clients, institutionalizing DEIJ training for the purpose of pay, we cannot underestimate the complexity and the effort and the the difficulties in turning a cruise ship in this direction. And Deborah, I feel like if we were in the same room, we would both be nodding at each other. I know nothing I'm saying is new to you. I just really value when we have committee calls where we can kind of get into this nuance and have these discussions without it being declaring a yes or no vote, but really just, are we on the same page with that? This is what's coming to me. Because Kim, I think your point really locked in earlier, and I hadn't reflected that when I reviewed the slides earlier. I really value you pointing a flashlight to that, because I see that risk as well. So thanks for listening to that.
And Maggie, I appreciate those comments, and I hope that you received, and obviously from the way that you kind of played back and processed what we were trying to say in terms of the timeliness, in terms of implementation. We are very sensitive to those exact types of issues that you raised with regards to equity and getting our supervisors trained such that, for example, if someone is rated, say, exceeds expectations 2 years and they are a minority, someone else that's a non-minority comes in, gets rated meets expectations, that person who has exceeded expectations over the years, they've got data to say, seriously, I don't get promoted. So I think that there's a number of ways that this information, this pay for performance type of approach can help address a lot of issues, particularly equity, but other issues in terms of morale and an incentive to bring your best every time you show up at our door, and we will compensate you for that in a meaningful way. So thank you all for your time, and yes, I appreciate, and we knew it was going to be a robust conversation, and we will continue, and this will be Cheryl's, I believe, last time that she will come before this committee, but it has been an extremely meaningful experience having her here for the past several months, and really helped us through this transition between the departing of our director and having her be an interim, as well as all of the other HR staff have just been troopers. Greatly appreciate all the work they've done.
Thank you, Deborah.
Thank you. Okay, so do we have time to do our last item? You all tell me. Jamie, we're talking about bonds again.
Yes.
So I assume
This will be
It's a quickie there.
okay.
All right, thank you. Good morning, Mayor and Council. I'm just here to give you a quick update on the bond and our communication plan. Next slide. So key takeaways, we're working hard to finalize our education materials to share with you all in the community. We'll be reaching out to stakeholders, neighborhood associations, boards and commissions, and we'll continue to update this committee on our progress. Next slide. Again, here are categories for the bond. Next slide. So the communications plan will include obviously our education materials. We'll have a web page on our website, one-pagers for each bond category, and a general bond overview, a bond overview video, and information and mapping on our current CIP projects and proposed bond projects. And again, we're reaching out to the stakeholder groups. Next slide. So our communications plan, the key messages that will be included in all of these materials is, issuing bonds as a common tool for cities to use to invest in our infrastructure. The city of Asheville is in a good position to issue debt. The proposed bond will provide us more options to meet our capital and infrastructure needs.
The proposed projects that have been prioritized in the bonds have been identified through community engagement, previous planning efforts, and our most recent national community survey, which was conducted late 2023, early 2024. Again, each category has priority projects identified. Any additional projects will be identified with equity, sustainability, current CIP, and our opportunities to leverage funds. Next slide. So the next steps, again, will be finalizing all of our materials. We'll come back to you all on September 10th at your next meeting, where we can share those materials and report out on our scheduled plan presentations to stakeholder groups. And then in October again with an update on what we've done and where we've been. Next slide. And back to key takeaways. So that was the quick update on where we are on the bond. Happy to answer any questions. And I know, well, that was really quick, only like 2 minutes. So we've got 9 minutes left.
When you say that this will go to boards and commissions, that means generally staff liaisons for any commission we have. Yeah, great.
Right, and people that, you know, if boards and commissions, then we'll reach out to them and ask if they would like an update upon request.
Great. I know a couple that have already mentioned it, MTC, the sustainability, or SAC. Those are just 2 that in conversation they have mentioned it, but yeah, good. So it'll just, anyone who wants to hear, I think that's a nice, nice measure. And then I'll just also add this conversation for my colleagues and all of our councilwomen colleagues. Our chamber, of course, partnering on the campaign out into the public. And so if there's any type of education that our staff wouldn't do, that we still see value, or community groups or information about that, happy to have, you know, any councilwoman participate in that kind of speaker series to the list of community events, and happy to talk more with you. But then also if there's anyone out there listening that wants more information, you can be in contact with the chamber, who is also going to do a lot of advocacy for this, whereas we're just going to do the education.
And one upcoming event, I do want to highlight, the Festival of Neighborhoods is September 14th, and we will be there with information about the bonds.
Perfect. Thanks, Jamie. Thanks for making that go really fast. Okay, do we have, we're at the end of our agenda under public comment. Do we have anyone holding for public comment?
1 second, let me reload and check. No, Mayor, we do not.
Okay. Then with that, we are adjourned.